If you're curious to hear a little music from our guest Carla Lucero, who we spoke to in our most recent episode, check out E4TT's annual concert of music by women and non-binary composers, Midnight Serenades, on January 25th. Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our conversation with Nina Shekhar, who we spoke to in December 2023. What advice would you give to young women artists and emerging artists and composers of color? I know the term emerging artists has become a bit of a flashpoint, but we don't really have anything else yet to substitute.
Sure. Yeah, so in terms of advice, there's many ways I could go with this. I think ultimately, the biggest advice for anybody is that, their voice matters and that they shouldn't be afraid to say what they want to say, how they want to say it, regardless of what anybody else thinks or other constraints that are put on them. And I think that this especially goes for, like young women or non-binary artists, composers of color. I think it's so often like marginalized identities tend to be constrained in a way that it's like we're so afraid of taking up space, especially like young women. I think like it's so we're conditioned, by society to kind of take as little space as possible. And
yeah.
I think that it's been a real like eye-opening journey for me. I think, I'm still a young woman and kind of feeling the last few years, like just kind of how I've been thinking about that idea of taking up space, how I engaged with my own voice and how I speak up, and I think also related to this is, a lot of Asian identity, like culturally, we're taught to like keep your head down, be quiet, don't disturb it, just like move ahead, like don't bother with like, kind of trying to dismantle anything. You're just kind of keep your head down. And I think both of that, I think it's been really interesting as I moved through the field and kind of counter a lot of fears I had about speaking up and taking up space. But then also, I think related to that is I think men are conditioned that they should take up as much space as possible, but then they think everybody else should too, or like that's like we should be like them. When actually, I think maybe it's a good thing that we don't take up as much space because we have a sense of empathy. Like I actually think like I critique that notion of like everybody should be as loud as possible because I don't think that's true. I think that really we should be listening to each other a lot more. We should be making space for others, to have their own platform. And I think that that's something that I think about for younger artists, as we move through the field. It's really scary to like, put yourself out there and especially in a time where it's like identity is so policed or so like
Fraught.
fraught, I would say. And it's just so like scary right now to be honest about your own experiences and feel like you can say what you want to say without somebody else censoring it or changing your honesty in what you want to say. So I think that ideally I would think that that's the most important thing for young artists, for them to have that be able to move through the field and be able to create the work that they want to make without having fear of being censored in some way. And I'm saying this because I had a few experiences, especially like after 2020. I think with everything going on socially around that time, um, it's like a lot of organizations suddenly felt like they were on like hot coals and were like really afraid of everything, and also not really understanding how to deal with change and actually like meaningful change. Like I think there was a lot of this kind of like putting a band-aid on things, but not
Hmm.
actually
Hmm.
wanting to change things. And like yeah, in 2021, I had a couple pieces censored for very
No,
different reasons. Yeah, and it really affected me, and I
what
think that
happened?
contributed. There were just certain instances where it's like one piece, some that Bach piece actually was somebody programmed it. It was already an existing piece. You know, it wasn't like it was a commission. Then somebody thought it was too political. That like, how dare
Oh my God.
I take apart Bach? It was like actually a real issue for somebody. And then on the other side of things, it was like a piece where I wrote something about immigrant identity, and it
Hmm.
had a lot of double meanings, and the ensemble did not understand any of those double meanings and thought that it was like this really vanilla, like they didn't understand that there was like this kind of sense of
Subtext.
yeah, subtext, and they thought it was not essentially like not a traumatized piece enough. So like it's like kind of the opposite things that have happened, and I think it contributed to some of the burnout that I felt in after that year. And I
Sure.
think, you know, since then I kind of been really thinking about like what is it that I want to say and how can I preserve that space for myself where I can say what I want to say and make sure that I don't feel like I'm stifling my voice in any way, and that like ideally what we want is a field where everybody has the agency, has the platform to speak their own truth. And um yeah, I've been trying to make sure that I can do that and feel like I have that, and I do feel like I have that now. And I think
Good.
I just always empathize, you know, with other young artists who are just starting and you know, are really afraid of their next paycheck, you know, of like, you know, how like building their career, building a network and being so afraid of being censored in some way. Like I think that it's really important to me that they feel like they have that space where they can be themselves.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially for young women in all cultures, because we get we get very far by figuring out how to get approval, right? And how to get that A plus or whatever. But there comes a point where, as an artist, if all you're doing is trying to get approval, you are censoring yourself and you aren't hearing your own voice. And if you don't hear your own voice, you can't authentically share it with other people, and they will sense that you aren't in some way, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's the sense of needing approval is it's so interesting because I think about that in many aspects of my personal life, you know, and many aspects of my life. But I think in a career sense, also, it's like we're constantly looking for, you know, a good review, for some sort of well-known institution to program us or commission us, like approval from all of these other entities, you know, getting into a degree program, like approval from like a academia, like all of these things. Um, and yeah, it's like, wait, what is it that we actually want to do? Like, what is it that we want to say? And yeah, I think it's tough to kind of opt out of that like constant need for approval by these other entities. But I think it's really important that it's almost like building your own network of approval, like a different, like opting out from these structures that you can have your own space to do what you want to do, or a different community of people who have the same values as you, and like share your goals, you know, which might be different than like these other entities' goals. So it's a challenging thing to kind of mediate, but ultimately, I think that's really important.
I agree. Totally agree. Do you have other recent or upcoming projects you'd like to tell us about, or tell us more about your dissertation projects, whatever you'd like.
Yeah, so I have several upcoming projects, couple concerto or orchestra kinds of projects. So I mentioned, with the sound investment composer, I'm doing a piece with LA Chamber Orchestra, which for next spring it's going to be premiered then, and it's kind of a fun piece. I'm working through it and exploring different ideas through this process, and trying kind of, it's a little bit more of me thinking just sonically, and like I want to write certain fun things instead of thinking quite as conceptually, but it's been a nice break, I think, for me to try to do that and just have fun with that orchestration process. And after that, I'm also writing a accordion concerto, actually, for a really incredible accordionist named Hanji Wang. And she is such a wonderful musician, just so expressive in her playing. She is kind of a virtuoso also. She like technically is extremely gifted. And she's done surprisingly quite a bit of contemporary music. She actually worked very closely with Sofia Gubaidulina on an album of accordion works, and she's used to that process of collaborating with composers. So it's in a way that I don't think is expected of accordionists. So it's kind of, I'm excited for that. That's coming up the following year. And it's like also for me kind of a new challenge. I always want to learn something new with every work I do. And with this, obviously, I'm not an accordion player. I do not own an accordion. I have very little experience with that. And it's like a really fun challenge to just like understand this very different instrument and how it functions. And I'm excited for this project because it's very different than anything I would have done before. So, yeah.
And it's got a cool timbre.
Right. It's a beauty. I mean, I always loved the sound of the accordion.
Yeah.
Like I would always want to use like accordion samples in like electronic works of mine and things like that. But it's like a fun challenge for me to have to like actually understand the physicality of the instrument and how it works just mechanically and what's like technically possible on it. So so that's coming up and I'm excited for it.
I can't wait to hear both of those. Is there anything that I didn't ask or that we didn't talk about that you wish I had or that we had?
I feel like you did such a good job of covering such a holistic range of questions. And I'm just really like grateful to you for really researching so much about me and my practice and asking such thoughtful questions. I can't think of anything else to talk about. You did such a great job already.
Well, you gave great answers. So it was fascinating hearing about your practice and how your mind works, because what you're doing is very mindful and very thoughtful. So it's really interesting to hear about.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Trying to learn something new with everything I do. So, all I can say is we'll just keep learning and growing. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, let's end the interview or the conversation really, with mutual admiration and my thanks to you for doing this.
Oh, thank you so much, Nanette. It was so great to talk with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Nina Shekhar, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts and tune in next week for Good Measure.